In the gray, pre-dawn light, where the horizon is nothing more than a jagged promise of another day, the observer stands upon a desolate bluff. Below, a river of dark, churning water carves through the earth, a chasm of uncertainty. Across that chasm, the golden sun begins to crown the distant peaks, illuminating a land of verdant promise. Between the observer and that golden shore, thousands of souls stand in a state of frantic industry. They are the bridge builders. They are hunched over blueprints, sketched in the dust of their own anxieties. They haul boulders of how, and mortar them with the sweat of what if. They labor under the crushing weight of their own designs, counting every stone, measuring every span, and trembling at the tremor of the river below. Their hands are calloused, their brows are furrowed, and their eyes are fixed so intently upon the construction that they have become blind to the very ground beneath their feet. It is a curious, harrowing paradox. The harder they work, the heavier the stones become. The more complex their bridges, the more they sway in the winds of doubt. They believe, with a religious fervor, that the destination is something to be earned through the exhaustion of the physical form. They believe the chasm is a void to be conquered by human engineering. Yet, a few paces to the left, unnoticed by the frantic throng, lies a path untouched by the heavy footfalls of the weary. It is the royal road. It does not require a blueprint. It requires a surrender. It does not demand the breaking of the back. It demands the breaking of the illusion. The golden light that hits the far shore also touches this path, revealing that the bridge was never a necessity. It was a distraction, a grand, self-imposed prison of logic. The observer watches as one soul, exhausted by the collapse of yet another span, finally drops the hammer of logic, looks toward the light, and feels the road beneath them hum with a silent, beckoning ease. Why does the human mind, in its infinite capacity for creativity, gravitate so naturally toward the architecture of struggle? To answer this, one must peer into the dark architecture of the beggar's logic. The fundamental error, the psychological rot at the root of the common road, is the belief in separation. Logic, by its very nature, is a tool of differentiation. It categorizes, it isolates, and it concludes that because an object is over there and the observer is here, there must be a bridge to close the gap. Logic thrives on the assumption of scarcity, that there is a finite amount of good in the world and that one must carve out a path to secure a portion of it. When the mind asks, "How will this happen?" it is not an inquiry. It is a confession of disbelief. It is the ego's way of asserting control in an environment it perceives as hostile. The recursive cycle is lethal. The more one questions the how, the more one reinforces the feeling of being apart from the desired outcome. This creates a feedback loop of anxiety. The brain, hardwired to scan for threats, interprets this anxiety as a mandate to work harder. It mistakenly equates tension with productivity. We see this in the professional who believes that to earn, one must suffer; in the partner who believes that to be loved, one must perform; in the artist who believes that to create, one must bleed. But what if the how is not a question for the builder, but a secret held by the universe? The philosophical shift required is the transition from linear causality to divine alignment. Linear causality, the realm of the bridge builder, argues that A leads to B and B leads to C. It is a rigid, mathematical, and ultimately exhausting way to live. Divine alignment suggests that the destination already exists in the eternal now. The road is not something to be built. It is a frequency to be tuned into. The why of our suffering is our addiction to the driver's seat. We fear that if we do not hold the steering wheel of our lives with white-knuckled intensity, the vehicle will careen into the chasm. We do not trust the road. We do not trust that the destination is already encoded into the landscape of our existence. To abandon the struggle is not to become passive. It is to become receptive. It is the act of stepping off the bridge and onto the road. trading the heavy mantle of architect of my own fate for the light, agile boots of the walker of the royal road. Consider the tale of Elias, a man known throughout his province as the greatest bridge builder of his age. Elias was a master of his craft. He could calculate the load-bearing capacity of a single rope with a glance. He lived for the draftsmanship of the impossible. His life was a monument to effort. One day, Elias set his sights on the Valley of Abundance. The distance was vast, the chasm deep. He spent 10 years, his prime years, gathering timber, smelting iron, and hiring laborers. His life became a series of grueling schedules and sleepless nights. Every time a storm threatened his progress, he felt the personal sting of failure. Every time a beam buckled, he took it as a divine indictment of his worthiness. As the bridge neared completion, a traveler arrived at the base of the construction site. The traveler was dressed in simple linens, carrying no tools, no blueprints, and no heavy supplies. He stopped, looked at the half-finished, swaying, groaning structure of iron and wood, and smiled with a gentle, maddening serenity. "Why do you build?" the traveler asked. Elias, sweating and covered in the dust of his labor, scoffed. "To reach the other side. To attain the abundance I have worked my life to earn." "Do you not see the depth of the chasm?" "I see the chasm," the traveler replied, "but I also see the path that leads through the floor of the valley, winding upward on the other side. A path paved by the natural flow of the earth, a road that requires no heavy lifting, only the strength to walk it." Elias looked down. He saw the path, but his ego, his identity as the master builder, recoiled. "That path is for those who do not have the strength to build," he cried. "I am a builder. My worth is in the bridge." Elias died before the bridge was finished. The bridge, unsupported by the integrity of the land, collapsed in a winter gale. The traveler, however, had reached the other side in a fraction of the time, his spirit unburdened by the debt of labor. The lesson is not that work is unnecessary. It is that the work you do while carrying the burden of the how is merely an anchor, not an engine. The bridge was not his passage, it was his tomb. To begin your walk on the royal road, you must first perform an act of internal demolition. Today, identify one area of your life where you are currently building a bridge. Perhaps it is the desperate search for financial security, the frantic attempt to fix a broken relationship, or the endless strategizing over your career. Stop the construction. You do not need to abandon your responsibilities, but you must abandon the anxiety attached to them. This is the first step of your transformation. You are shifting from the "I must figure this out" mentality to the "I am being guided" awareness. If you feel the weight of these stones slipping from your grasp, and you are ready to stop building bridges to nowhere, please, like this transmission, to anchor your intention. By doing so, you are signaling to your subconscious that you are ready to exchange the sweat of the builder for the wisdom of the walker. As you let go of your blueprints, you will find that the void you feared, that terrifying chasm, is not an empty space to be filled with your stress. It is a space of potential. When you cease the noise of the how, the silence begins to speak. In that silence, you will hear a different sound, a nudge, a sudden thought, a redirection that seems entirely counterintuitive to your logical mind. We invite you to subscribe to this journey, for in the next chapter, we descend into the very heart of this silence. We shall explore the two roads of the mind, and you will discover that the voice you have been dismissing as too simple or irrational is, in fact, the compass of your soul, waiting for you to trust it enough to take the first step. The road is not just ahead of you, it is beneath you. Are you ready to stop building and start walking? Imagine, if you will, two travelers standing at the edge of a vast, uncharted forest at dusk. The first traveler, the one we shall call the citizen of the common road, is gripped by a visceral, frantic energy. They are clutching a compass that spins wildly, its needle failing to settle, yet they stare at it with obsessive intensity, convinced that if they only calculate the magnetic north with enough precision, the path will reveal itself. They are hyper-vigilant. Every rustle of the leaves is interpreted as a threat. Every shadow is a hidden pitfall. Their pace is erratic, a series of sharp starts, desperate leaps, and sudden panicked retreats. They move with the cadence of one who believes they are alone in a hostile wilderness. A few yards away stands the second traveler, the seeker of the royal road. This individual possesses no compass, nor a map of their own making. Their posture is not one of tension, but of deep, resonant attention. They do not fight the forest. They listen to it. They move with a fluid, rhythmic grace, as if they are dancing to a melody only they can hear. When they encounter a thicket, they do not hack at it with a rusted blade. They pause, turn, and follow a faint, golden refraction of light filtering through the canopy, leading them effortlessly around the obstruction. The paradox is stark. The first traveler is working 1,000 times harder, yet remains stationary, consumed by the static of their own intellect. The second traveler is doing almost nothing by the standards of the world, yet they are arriving at destinations they did not know existed. One is defined by the fear of being lost. The other is defined by the faith of being led. It is the fundamental divergence of human experience. The roar of the anxious mind versus the whisper of the divine instinct. To understand this divergence, one must deconstruct the two competing authorities that vie for dominance within the human psyche. The logic of the ego and the intuition of the soul. Why does the ego cling so desperately to the common road? Because the ego's primary function is survival, not realization. It views the world through a lens of past data, established patterns, and finite limitations. When the ego encounters a challenge, it asks, "How have I solved this before?" Or, "What are the rules others follow?" It is inherently recursive, drawing its strength from the rearview mirror of history. It operates on the principle of linear causality. The ego believes that if it creates enough friction, if it worries enough, plans enough, and sacrifices enough, it can force the universe to yield. This is the beggar's way, because it assumes the source of supply is outside of oneself and must be snatched or negotiated for. But how does the intuition of the soul operate? It functions on the principle of nonlinear intelligence. Unlike logic, which must analyze 1,000 variables to reach a conclusion, intuition accesses the entire blueprint at once. It does not explain. It simply points. It is the still, small voice that exists in the interstices between thoughts. The psychological shift from the common road to the royal road is, therefore, a shift in the hierarchy of the self. We must ask, why do we fear intuition? We fear it because it lacks the evidence required by the ego. The ego demands a receipt for every step. Intuition requires a leap of faith. The ego is terrified of being wrong or irrational, whereas the soul understands that what the world calls irrational is often simply a higher form of rationality that the limited mind cannot yet fathom. When the mind is cluttered with the static of how-to anxiety, the signal of intuition is drowned out. This is the recursive trap. The more you try to figure out the path using logic, the more you atrophy the very faculty, your intuition, that is capable of perceiving the road. To transition, one must cultivate the capacity for active stillness. This is not passivity. It is the deliberate silencing of the ego's chatter, so that the higher, more resonant signal of the soul can become the primary guiding force. We are, in effect, changing the station from the frantic frequency of "I must" to the serene frequency of "it is." Consider the historical account of a merchant in a bustling ancient port, a man named Hanno. Hanno was a man of the common road. He had invested his entire fortune in a fleet of ships to transport spices across the Aegean. He spent his nights obsessing over the maps of the ancients, calculating wind currents with mathematical precision, and lecturing his captains on the necessity of following the charted routes. When a mysterious fog descended upon the coast, obscuring the horizon for weeks, Hanno's logic dictated that his ships remain in the harbor. It is suicide to sail without visibility, he reasoned. He kept his ships docked, paying daily maintenance costs, until his coffers began to run dry. His logical, calculated approach was perfectly sound, and it was leading him to ruin. Then there was a rival merchant, Elara, who operated by the principles of the Royal Road. When the same fog hit, Elara did not look at her maps. She spent her days in meditation, seeking an internal orientation rather than an external one. One morning, she felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to set sail. It made no sense to her crew. The wind was wrong, the charts were useless, and the fog was impenetrable. But the nudge was steady. It felt like a warm hand on her shoulder. Elara departed. Throughout the journey, she ignored the compass. She steered the ship based on subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in the temperature of the water and the sound of the current signs that her intuition had taught her to interpret. While Hanno's ships rotted at the docks, Elara arrived at a distant, sun-drenched port that had been hit by a sudden severe famine. The people there were desperate for the very spices she carried. She traded them for a fortune tenfold what she would have made on the original route. Hanno had followed the logical path and encountered disaster. Elara had followed the irrational path and encountered destiny. The lesson remains etched in the sands of time. Logic sees the obstacles, but intuition sees the hidden currents of opportunity. Elara did not conquer the sea. She aligned herself with its hidden, flowing truth. To embody this truth, you must begin to distinguish between the two voices in your own mind. The next time you face a difficult decision, a business deal, a relationship conflict, or a life-altering choice, do not reach for a notepad to list the pros and cons. Instead, move your attention from your head to your heart. Ask yourself, does this path create a sensation of constriction, or does it invite a sense of expansion? If the thought of the action makes your chest tight, your jaw clench, or your mind race with what-if scenarios, you are listening to the beggar's logic. Stop. Breathe. Wait. The Royal Road is never urgent. It is always peaceful, even when it is demanding. If the thought feels like an open door, even if it scares your logical mind, that is the nudge of the Royal Road. Take that step, no matter how small. The transition from the citizen of the common road to the seeker of the Royal Road is a shift in loyalty. You are choosing to be loyal to your own inner knowing, rather than the consensus of the fearful. As you begin this practice of listening, you will find that the world begins to respond not to your struggle, but to your alignment. You are now beginning to understand that the problem you are facing is not an obstruction to be fought, but a piece of a larger tapestry. But what happens when the logic of the world, the bank accounts, the critics, and the cold, hard data demands that you return to the old way? How do you maintain your position on the Royal Road when the world screams that you are delusional? In the next chapter, we shall explore the architecture of the Royal Road itself. We will move beyond the theory of the two voices and into the mechanics of how to view your life from the rooftop of the universe, ensuring that no matter how loud the static of the common road becomes, you remain anchored in the panoramic clarity of your own divine design. The view from the rooftop is breathtaking. Are you ready to ascend? In the heart of the capital of a great, sprawling empire, there stands an ancient stone tower. In the lowest dungeon of this edifice, a prisoner sits, his eyes fixed upon a single, jagged slit in the masonry, the only window to the world outside. Through this narrow aperture, he sees a frantic, dusty street. He watches the merchants shouting, the horses kicking up grit, and the occasional passerby clutching their cloaks against the wind. Based on this limited perspective, He concludes that life is a desperate scramble for scraps, a place where one must elbow their way through the throng to survive. He builds his entire philosophy of existence upon the chaotic, flickering images that pass by that tiny, fractured frame. Yet, unbeknownst to the prisoner, there is a spiral staircase within the tower, hidden behind tapestries of neglect and doubt, which leads to the very summit of the structure. High, above the dust and the shouting, the rooftop offers a view that defies the prisoner's logic. From this vantage, the street is not a place of struggle, but a deliberate, interconnected network of paths. The observer on the roof sees the entire landscape. They see the river that provides the water, the sun that ripens the grain, and the rhythmic flow of the seasons that dictates the harvest. They see that the scramble below is an illusion born of proximity. From the height of the roof, the world is revealed as a symphony of divine order. The paradox is this. The prisoner believes he is a realist because he focuses on the facts of the street, while the dweller on the roof is dismissed as a dreamer for observing the pattern of the whole. But it is the prisoner who is delusional, blinded by the claustrophobia of his own intellect, while the dweller on the roof has simply aligned their perception with the architecture of reality. To ascend to the rooftop, one must first understand the psychological architecture of the two perspectives. The prisoner's view is what we define as segmented cognition. It is the hallmark of the logical mind. It works by breaking reality into discrete, manageable pieces, an approach that is useful for building a clock, but catastrophic for living a life. Why does the logical mind insist on this segmentation? Because it craves certainty, and certainty is only found in the quantifiable. The mind believes that if it can measure, categorize, and control every part of its circumstances, it can guarantee a favorable outcome. This is a recursive fallacy. The more the mind segments, the more it creates conflict between the parts. It sees the problem as a standalone entity, independent of the solution, and spends its life trying to bridge the two. How, then, does the rooftop perspective, the royal road, bypass this? It operates through holistic intuition. Intuition is not a hunch in the whimsical sense. It is a higher-order cognitive process that accesses the totality of the blueprint. When one follows an intuitive lead, they are not acting on incomplete information. They are acting on information that exists beyond the scope of the logical window. Why is it so difficult for the modern soul to trust this? Because the ego views the unknown as a death sentence. It demands to see the full staircase before it will take the first step. But the royal road is an architecture of trust. It requires the dissolution of the how. When you ask, "How will this work out?" you are effectively telling the universe that you do not trust the architect of the landscape. You are trying to peer through the dungeon window while standing on the rooftop. The mechanism of this intuition is spiritual sensing. It does not provide a blueprint. It provides a point. It acts as a compass needle that ignores the local obstacles to align with the ultimate magnetic north of your purpose. To live on the royal road is to accept that the how is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is merely the follow-through, the willingness to move when the nudge comes, even if the destination remains obscured by the very fog that logic fears. You are shifting your identity from the frantic inhabitant of the dungeon to the sovereign observer of the summit. In a kingdom known for its arid, unforgiving soil, there lived two gardeners. The first, Silas, was a man of the window. He approached his garden with the fervor of a combatant. He spent his days obsessing over the pH levels of the dirt, measuring the exact volume of water for each plant, and erecting elaborate barriers against the wind. He worked 16 hours a day, his face etched with the wariness of a man who believes he is solely responsible for the miracle of life. When a heat wave arrived, Silas panicked. He hauled water until his muscles tore, his mind consumed by the fear of loss. He saw only the thirsty plants and the relentless sun. He was a prisoner of his own efforts. The second gardener, Elara, was a woman of the rooftop. She did not ignore the labor, but her approach was fundamentally different. She spent the early hours of the morning in stillness, observing the lay of the land, the flow of the air, and the subtle shifts in the soil. She did not work against the season. She worked in harmony with it. One day, a persistent inner voice prompted her to dig a trench in a specific, seemingly illogical corner of the property, far from her primary crops. Her neighbors mocked her, for the ground there was hard and appeared barren. "Why waste your strength?" they asked. Elara could not explain her reasoning with logic. She simply felt that the earth beneath that specific spot held a secret. She followed the hunch, digging until she hit a hidden, naturally occurring aquifer, subterranean river that had been dormant for decades. The water bubbled forth, transforming her entire plot of land into an oasis. While Silas's garden withered in the heat, Elara's crops flourished, fed by a source that logic couldn't see, but intuition had known was there all along. Silas had focused on the parts and failed. Elara had trusted the whole and succeeded. Silas was building a bridge to nowhere. Elara was walking the royal road. To embody the rooftop perspective today, you must practice the art of strategic withdrawal. Whenever you feel the symptoms of the prisoner, the tightening chest, the racing thoughts, the urgent need to do something to fix a situation, you must physically and mentally pause. This is the act of stepping away from the window. Go to a space of quiet. Do not ask for a solution. Instead, state this decree: I step back from the window of my own logic. I open myself to the panoramic view of the divine. Wait for the whisper. It will not be a shout, and it will rarely be a complex plan. It will be a simple, calm, and often irrational instruction. Call this person. Buy this book. Change your route to work. Take a walk. These are the breadcrumbs of the royal road. You do not need to know where they lead. You only need to follow them. This is the testing of the expansiveness. If the action brings a sense of release, it is the royal road. If it brings a sense of dread, it is the prison window. If you are ready to stop staring at the narrow window of your own worries and are prepared to ascend to the rooftop of your own divine potential, please like this video. By doing so, you are casting a vote for the panoramic view over the dungeon's gloom. You are now learning that your intuition is not a weakness, but a superpower, a direct connection to the master blueprint of your life. But even when we begin to see the path, there is a lingering shadow that keeps us from walking it freely. It is a weight that we carry, often without realizing it, that keeps us tethered to the floor of the dungeon. It is the weight of debt, not financial, but emotional. In the next chapter, we shall descend into the dark, hidden chamber of the heart to address the most profound block to your prosperity: the grudge. We will discuss why you cannot receive the abundance of the royal road while you are still playing the role of the judge in the courthouse of your own mind. The release of this debt is the final key to opening the gate. Are you prepared to let go of the case you have been building against the world? In the inner chambers of the human mind, there exists a silent, flickering courthouse. The floors are polished marble, cold and unforgiving, and the air is thick with the scent of stagnant ink and aging parchment. Here, the individual sits as both plaintiff and judge, perpetually presiding over a case that never reaches a verdict. Observe the seeker who stands on the precipice of a great breakthrough. They are talented, driven, and seemingly aligned with their purpose. Yet, they remain stagnant, their prosperity dammed up like a river choked by debris. If one were to peer into the shadows of their mind, one would find them clutching a ledger of phantom record of every slight, every betrayal, and every emotional debt they believe the world owes them. They are mentally suing a relative for a lost inheritance, a former partner for an evaporated dream, or a colleague for a stolen opportunity. The paradox is agonizingly clear. The very person who desires to be free is the one who keeps themselves in chains. They act as if they are entitled to a payout from the universe, yet they spend their waking hours in the courtroom of resentment, arguing for a debt that can never be paid in the currency they demand. They are trying to collect interest on a broken heart, forgetting that a heart occupied by a grudge has no room for the abundance of the divine. They are, in effect, trying to hold a door open with one hand, while keeping it barricaded with the other. The golden light of the royal road shines upon them, but they are too busy staring at the ink-stained pages of their grievances to step forward. To move beyond the common road, one must confront the most insidious obstacle to the soul's expansion: the weight of unforgiven debt. Why do we cling to our grudges? Philosophically, the grudge is a strategy of the ego. It is a misguided attempt to maintain justice. The mind reasons that if it holds on to the hurt, it is somehow holding the other person accountable or preventing the loss from happening again. It is a form of psychic insurance, a belief that by remembering the betrayal, one is protecting the self from future vulnerability. However, the reality is the inverse. By holding the grudge, the seeker creates a psychic anchor. The energy required to sustain a state of resentment is astronomical. It consumes the very vitality that should be directed toward the manifestation of one's desires. When you mentally soothe another person, you are essentially tethering your future to their past. You are saying, "I cannot move forward until you pay me back for what you did." But the universe does not operate on the books of your personal victimhood. How does this block the flow of supply? The law of the royal road is the law of alignment. If your inner landscape is populated by enemies and creditors, you are signaling to the divine intelligence that you live in a world of scarcity and theft. Your mental currency, the focus and attention you possess, is being spent on litigating the past rather than investing in the future. The recursive nature of this block is profound. The more you resent, the more you perceive the world as unfair. The more you perceive the world as unfair, the more you feel justified in your resentment. This is the beggar's logic in its most crystallized form. To clear this block, one must realize that the person who offended you is not the source of your loss. They were merely a channel through which you perceived a limitation. If you think your prosperity depends on an apology, a settlement, or a change of heart in another person, you have handed the keys to your kingdom to a stranger. You have made yourself a subject to their whims. The path to release is not about excusing the behavior of others. It is about reclaiming the power you have surrendered to the courthouse of your own mind. In the prosperous trading town of Oak Haven, there lived a merchant named Julian. Julian was a man of vision, possessing a gift for identifying the needs of the marketplace before they were even articulated. Yet, despite his genius, his business lay in ruin. For years, he had been embroiled in a bitter dispute with his former business partner, a man who had left the firm and taken several key clients with him. Julian spent his days in the courthouse of his study. He would pace for hours, crafting elaborate arguments in his head, rehearsing the speech he would one day deliver to prove his partner's treachery. He believed that if he could just win this argument, if he could prove the world was wrong, and he was right, his finances would somehow reset. He was waiting for a check from the universe that was being held up by his own refusal to let go of the past. A wise mentor, seeing Julian's decline, offered him a simple, terrifying piece of advice. "Julian, you are currently the unpaid debt collector for a store that has already closed. Every moment you spend in that courtroom is a moment you are not in the marketplace. You are not waiting for your partner to pay you. You are waiting for yourself to release the claim." Julian fought this, as the ego always fights for the right to be hurt. But one evening, broken and facing the loss of his home, he sat in his study, closed his ledger, and did the unthinkable. He took a pen and wrote a letter to his former partner. Not a letter of accusation, but a letter of blessing. He wrote, "I release you from the debt of my expectations. I reclaim my energy, and I forgive the space you occupied in my heart." He did not send the letter. He burned it, The following morning, the atmosphere in his home felt lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from his chest. Within 3 days, a venture capitalist from a distant city, someone he had never met, approached him with a proposal that eclipsed anything he had ever achieved with his former partner. The channel had been cleared. Julian had stopped looking for his supply in the hands of his rival and had returned to the source. The deal was not a coincidence. It was the inevitable movement of law once the blockage of resentment was dissolved. To embody this today, you must identify the phantom creditor in your life. Who is it that you are still suing in the courthouse of your mind? It may be a parent, a spouse, a boss, or even a version of yourself that you have not yet forgiven for past failures. Sit in silence and visualize the person standing before you. Do not attempt to justify their actions or your own. Simply see them as a channel of flawed, human delivery driver who missed a package. Realize that by holding them responsible for your happiness, you have been trying to collect from a dry well. Take a deep, conscious breath and declare, I release this debt. I bless you and I release you. You are not the source of my good, and you are not the cause of my lack. I return to my own source. Feel the physical sensation of the ledger slipping from your hands. You are not being weak. You are being sovereign. You are choosing to invest your mental energy into the building of your own future rather than the litigation of your past. If you are ready to vacate the courtroom of your mind and step onto the path of true, unhindered prosperity, please like this video as a symbol of your release. You have now learned how to clear the internal debris that blocks your flow. You have stepped out of the dungeon of the window and vacated the courthouse of the grudge. You are beginning to walk with a new lightness, a new, sovereign ease. But there remains a final, grand illusion to confront. The belief that the people in your life, your employer, your clients, the economy are the ones who provide your supply. You have cleared the channel. But do you know who is actually pouring the water through it? In the next chapter, we shall explore the mystery of the infinite warehouse. You will discover that the people you see as your benefactors or your tormentors are merely the delivery drivers of the divine. Once you understand the nature of the warehouse, you will never fear the loss of a client or a job again. You will learn to stop arguing with the driver and start calling upon the source. Are you ready to claim your true paymaster? In the grand, bustling marketplace of human affairs, there is a curious pantomime that plays out every day, performed by those who believe their lives are governed by the whims of others. Consider the employee trembling before the door of the supervisor, the entrepreneur agonizing over a single, fickle client, or the artist waiting for the nod of a critic. They stand with their palms upturned, eyes darting, caught in a state of perpetual, anxious supplication. They treat these figures, the employer, the customer, the patron, as if they were the gods of their destiny, the gatekeepers of the very air they breathe. The cinematic irony here is as sharp as it is tragic. They are begging the delivery driver for the contents of the warehouse. They see the courier arriving with a package, and because they perceive the courier's hand as the source, they fear that if the courier turns away, the supply ceases to exist. They watch the driver leave, and they panic, assuming that the well has run dry, that the wealth of the world has vanished, or that they have somehow offended the person in the uniform. They do not realize that the courier is merely a medium, a temporary instrument of a much larger, invisible mechanism. They are living as servants to the delivery, entirely oblivious to the vast, infinite storehouse that exists behind the veil of the material world. To be a beggar of men is to live in a state of manufactured scarcity, perpetually at the mercy of a hand that has no power to create, only to deliver. To break the chain of this delusion, one must engage in a rigorous deconstruction of the concept of source. Why does the human mind insist that its provision comes from the hand of another? It is an evolutionary relic, a holdover from a primitive state where survival depended on the dominance of the tribe or the favor of the chieftain. Our brains are hardwired to identify the provider as an external entity. We look for the face, the signature, or the bank account that authorizes our security. But here we must apply recursive logic. If the person who provides for you is themselves provided for by the laws of the universe, are they the source? Or are they a conduit? If you trace the chain of supply back far enough, you arrive not at a person, but at an infinite intelligence, an inexhaustible, invisible reservoir of opportunity, creativity, and energy. This is the infinite warehouse. How, then, does the shift occur? It is the transition from person-dependent security to law-dependent security. The person who believes their employer is their paymaster is, by definition, a slave to that employer's mood, the company's quarterly earnings, and the economy's volatility. But the one who recognizes the universe as the paymaster is liberated. They understand that if one channel, a job, a client, a contract closes, it is not because the supply has ended, it is merely that the channel has fulfilled its purpose. Why do we cling to the rude delivery driver? Because we mistake the form for the substance. We fear that the channel is unique and irreplaceable. This is the ultimate expression of the common road. The royal road, conversely, recognizes that because the source is infinite, the channels are infinite. If the driver is rude, you do not argue with them, for they have no power over your prosperity. You simply turn your attention back to the warehouse and decree, if this channel is closed, a new and better one opens for me now. This is the psychological mastery of the sovereign. You are no longer navigating the whims of people. You are navigating the consistency of law. In the Valley of Dry Heat, there was a village that relied entirely on a single, aging aqueduct to bring water from the mountains. The villagers worshipped the aqueduct. They spent their lives polishing its stones and offering sacrifices to its masonry. When the water flow slowed or turned murky, the village would descend into a state of hysterical mourning. They would berate the stonemasons, argue with their neighbors, and beg the sky for mercy. They believed the aqueduct was the water. One traveler, arriving from the high peaks, watched this spectacle with a calm, discerning eye. He noticed a woman in the village, Seraphina, who did not participate in the frantic, fearful rituals. While the others were screaming at the cracks in the aqueduct, she was quietly digging in her own backyard. She worked with a steady, unhurried pace, despite the mocking laughter of the villagers. The water comes from the mountains, not from this crumbling stone, she told them, but they could not hear her. They were too invested in the sanctity of their fragile delivery system. One day, the great aqueduct suffered a catastrophic collapse. The water stopped. The village panicked, convinced that their end had come. They huddled in the ruins, waiting for the stonemasons to return. But Seraphina, having struck the vein of the hidden spring she had been digging toward, watched as cool, clear water began to bubble up from the very earth beneath her feet. She did not hoard the water, nor did she gloat. She simply allowed her well to overflow, creating a new, direct path for the village to follow. The village had been starving for water because they were obsessed with the pipe. Seraphina survived because she went straight to the mountain source. The stonemason's work was necessary for a time, but it was never the water itself. When you realize that your job, your business, and your network are just the aqueducts, you stop worshiping the pipe and you start trusting the spring. To embody this today, perform the audit of allegiance. Identify the people or institutions in your life that you believe are the gatekeepers of your success. Your boss, your most important client, or perhaps a spouse who holds the finances. Now, practice this shift. Mentally detach them from the role of source. Look at them and say to yourself, you are a channel, not the creator. I am grateful for your service, but I do not depend on your favor for my security. My security is in the law. when you feel the anxiety of a potential loss, a lost contract, a closed door, do not fight the person or the situation. Do not plead. Instead, immediately redirect your focus to the infinite warehouse. Declare, "This door closes, and a greater one opens. The divine is my paymaster, and it has infinite ways to manifest my good. I do not fear the change of the channel, for the source remains eternal." If you are ready to stop begging the delivery drivers and start claiming your inheritance from the source, please like this video. By doing so, you declare your independence from the whims of men and your alignment with the abundance of the law. You are now beginning to see that you are not a pawn in a game played by others. You are the player in a game designed by the infinite. You have learned to release your grudges and to identify the true source of your supply. But you may still feel like an accidental traveler, someone who occasionally glimpses the royal road but often falls back into the habits of the common way. In the next chapter, we shall explore the mechanics of intentional intuition. We will move beyond merely hoping for a hunch to commanding the state of guidance. You will learn how to turn the accidental miracles of your past into a repeatable, daily reality. The royal road is not a place you visit. It is a life you live. Are you prepared to learn the language of the divine nudge? In the quiet, humdrum corridors of a life lived by rote, there exists a profound and haunting paradox. Every soul, no matter how deeply entrenched in the drudgery of the common road, has experienced the flash. It is that sudden, inexplicable urge to take a different route home, which leads to the meeting of a lifetime. It is the random, unbidden thought to call an old acquaintance, which results in the offer of a new career. It is the uneasy, visceral shiver that warns one away from a bad investment, a warning that, had it been heeded by the rational mind, would have saved a fortune. These are the accidental moments of the royal road brief, unbidden intrusions of divine guidance into a life otherwise governed by the noise of the ego. They are like stolen glances at a map of a hidden treasure, moments where the curtain of the material world is pulled back, revealing a design of breathtaking precision. Yet, for most, these events are dismissed as coincidence or luck. They are treated as anomalies, rare glimmers of light in a landscape of struggle. The tragedy is not that these moments happen, but that they are allowed to fade, leaving the individual to return to the frantic, labored building of their own bridges. They are visitors to the kingdom, rather than citizens. To live on the royal road, one must stop treating these flashes as miracles and start treating them as a language. To transition from the accidental to the intentional, one must perform a fundamental restructuring of the cognitive hierarchy. Why do we treat intuition as an erratic guest rather than a reliable mentor? Because the logical mind demands repeatability and predictability. Intuition, by its nature, is fluid and nonlinear. The ego concludes that because it cannot control the hunch cannot be trusted. This is the recursive error. By demanding that guidance conform to the rigid, predictable patterns of logic, we effectively mute the very signal we require to navigate the unknown. How do we move into intentionality? We must recognize that intuition is not a force that visits us. It is a frequency that we occupy. The why of our failure to maintain this state lies in our loyalty to the ego's need for urgency. The ego believes that important things must be forced, pushed, and agonized over. It mistakes the feeling of tension for the feeling of significance. The how of intentional intuition, therefore, requires a radical recalibration of the body's sensory register. We must distinguish between fear-based impulse and divine nudge. The fear-based impulse is a push. It is heavy, urgent, and usually attached to a narrative of scarcity. Do this now, or you will miss out, or you must fix this, or you are a failure. It tightens the jaw, constricts the breath, and narrows the vision to a singular, desperate point. The divine nudge is a pull. It is light, expansive, and steady. It often comes as a calm, irrational, yet certain invitation. It feels like an opening of the chest and a clearing of the mental air. To make intuition intentional, we must commit to the practice of refinement. This involves a daily tuning of the consciousness. We must observe our internal landscape with the detachment of a scientist. When a thought enters the mind, we must ask, is this a prompt of spirit or a projection of anxiety? The more we validate the light, expansive prompts, even in minor, inconsequential matters, the more we train our nervous system to recognize the signal of the royal road. We are not waiting for a lightning bolt. We are learning to follow the breadcrumbs of peace. In the age of great maritime exploration, there lived a navigator named Captain Vane. He was legendary for his ability to sail through the most treacherous, fog-choked straits without ever running his ship aground. His rivals whispered that he possessed a secret, magical compass, a device that could see through the thickest weather. They tried to buy it, steal it, and spy on him, but they found nothing. In truth, Vane's secret was not an object. It was a discipline of intentional intuition. While other captains relied entirely on their physical charts, which were often outdated and obscured by the fog, Vane spent his time in a state of hyper-attuned stillness. He did not ignore the charts, but he treated them as secondary. He focused on the feel of the ship, the sound of the wind against the rigging, and the subtle, instinctive corrections of his own pulse. Once, his ship was surrounded by a wall of mist that had swallowed the horizon for days. His crew was terrified. They had lost all sense of direction. His first mate, a man of cold, logical calculation, begged Vane to anchor. "We are sailing blind," the mate argued, pointing to the empty sea. "If we move, we invite disaster." Vane smiled. He felt the ship under his feet. He felt a peculiar, warm pressure in his chest, a sensation he had learned to recognize as the signal of the right way. He turned the wheel, not to follow the map, but to follow the feeling. Hours later, the fog parted, revealing a narrow, hidden channel that bypassed the jagged reefs where his rivals were currently foundering. Vane had not stumbled into the channel by luck. He had engaged in a dialogue with the sea. He had taken the accidental guidance of his youth and refined it into a precise, intentional navigation system. The channel was not a prize for his daring. It was the destination he had been consistently steering toward, guided by the whisper of the water. To move from accidental to intentional intuition today, you must adopt the protocol of the small hunch. Do not wait for a life-altering crisis to test your guidance system. Practice on the trivialities. When you are about to reach for your phone, pause. Ask, is this a nudge or a distraction? If it feels heavy or automatic, put it down. When you have a sudden, seemingly irrational urge to go to a specific cafe, or to read a particular book, or to reach out to a specific person, act on it immediately, without waiting for the logical reason to materialize. This is the act of validation. Every time you act on a small nudge and find that it leads to a moment of ease, a pleasant conversation, or a solution to a minor irritation, you are building the proof of concept. You are demonstrating to your own brain that the royal road is not a fairy tale. You are training the nervous system to trust the frequency. If you are ready to stop waiting for luck to save you and are prepared to command the power of intentional guidance, please subscribe to this journey. By doing so, you are committing to the discipline of the navigator. You are now learning to discern the frequency of the divine from the static of the ego. You have the tools to navigate, but even the best navigator must have the discipline to protect their focus. In this world, we are surrounded by a constant bombardment of mental noise, the judgments, the comparisons, and the anxieties of others. Every one of these thoughts acts as a tax on your creative potential. In the next chapter, we shall explore the currency of thought. You will learn why your mental focus is the ultimate seed money for your harvest. Most people are spiritually bankrupt, not because they lack resources, but because they are squandering their capital on the thoughts that drain them. You will learn how to protect your mental wealth and invest it into the life you are decreeing. The harvest is waiting. Are you ready to stop wasting the seeds? In the opulent, sprawling theater of the human mind, every individual is the sole proprietor of a vault of infinite potential. This vault is not filled with gold or silver, but with something far more volatile and potent: the seed money of one's future. Yet, witness the average inhabitant of this world. They stand amidst a vast fertile field of their own design, holding a satchel of these golden seeds, and with every passing hour they cast them recklessly into the gutters of regret, the pits of comparison, and the arid sands of judgment. The cinematic paradox is profound. These individuals lament their poverty, their lack of opportunity, and the stagnation of their lives, all while they are actively spending their greatest capital on the mental rehearsal of their own undoing. They spend their morning hours paying for the arguments they had yesterday. They spend their afternoons investing in the envy they feel for their neighbors. They spend their evenings financing their anxieties about the future. They are the architects of their own spiritual bankruptcy. They work with the physical world hauling, lifting, and stressing. But they are completely bankrupt in the metaphysical world. They do not realize that every thought is a transactional act, a spending of energy that dictates the harvest they will reap in the material realm. To be a master of the royal road, one must stop playing the spendthrift of the spirit and become the conscious investor of the soul. To understand the currency of thought, one must first dismantle the illusion that thinking is a passive or neutral act. Philosophically and psychologically, the mind is a creative instrument that works in accordance with the law of correspondence, as within, so without. Why does the ego demand that we spend our mental currency on negativity? Because negativity is the ego's primary tool for creating a sense of relational safety. By judging others, we feel superior. By comparing ourselves to others, we gauge our status. By rehearsing grievances, we maintain a sense of correctness. This is a recursive trap. The ego believes it is protecting the self by focusing on the dangers of the world, but in doing so, it depletes the very energy required for creation. How does this lead to spiritual bankruptcy? Every time the mind engages in a judgment, a critique, or a comparison, it is performing a transaction. It is purchasing an outcome. If you focus on what you lack, you are essentially investing your seed money into a harvest of scarcity. The universe, which acts as the ultimate clearinghouse for your mental transactions, does not care if you want the outcome or not. It only cares where you have placed your focus. It treats your attention as a purchase order. The why behind our chronic state of lack is our addiction to the mental deficit. We feel we cannot afford to stop worrying because we believe worrying is a form of preparation. This is the ultimate catastrophic error. Preparation happens in the state of stillness and decree. Worry is merely the squandering of the present moment's power. The shift to the royal road requires a move from the spendthrift mentality, where thoughts are tossed about like chaff in the wind, to the sovereign investor mentality, where every thought is a deliberate, high-value investment in the desired outcome. You must ask, am I buying the reality I want, or am I continuing to fund the reality I fear? There once lived a weaver in a distant land who was famous for the richness and vibrancy of the tapestries she produced. Her works were said to hold the color of the sunrise and the depth of the midnight sky, yet she lived in a modest home with a small, neglected plot of land. One day, a king visited her and asked, "How do you weave such magnificent scenes when your own garden is full of thorns and withered stalks?" The weaver smiled and said, "I have only one satchel of seeds. The garden of my life is the canvas upon which I manifest my thoughts. For years, I believed that the weeds were inevitable, so I spent all my time tending to them, trying to argue them away, trying to understand why they grew. I was so busy fighting the thorns that I had no seeds left to plant the flowers." "What changed?" the king asked. "I realized She replied that the weeds do not need my attention to grow, they only need my neglect, but the flowers require my currency. I stopped looking at the weeds. I stopped spending my time discussing the thorns with my neighbors. I took my satchel of seeds, my gratitude, my faith, my clear decree of beauty, and I planted them in the corner of my garden. I treated every positive thought as a gold coin. I ceased the tax of judgment and saved the wealth of appreciation. The garden transformed, not because I fought the weeds, but because I became a miser with my attention, spending it only on what I wished to see. The king looked at the garden, and indeed, amidst the old thorns, new, radiant blossoms were beginning to break the soil. The weaver had learned the most sacred economic lesson of the royal road. Your attention is the only true capital you possess. When you stop financing the darkness, you suddenly have an infinite budget for the light. To embody the mastery of your mental currency today, you must conduct a thought audit. For the next 24 hours, observe your mind as if you were a bank manager overseeing your accounts. Whenever you catch yourself spending your currency, your mental focus on judging another, comparing your progress, or reliving a past failure, you must immediately halt the transaction. Say to yourself, "This is a bad investment. I refuse to pay for this thought." Then, instantly redirect that currency. Plant a new seed. Instead of criticizing a colleague, bless them and envision their success. Instead of worrying about your finances, declare, "My supply is infinite, and I am wisely investing my attention in the realization of my good." This is the discipline of the royal road. You are moving from the state of the victim who is being taxed by the world's chaos to the sovereign who is investing in the world's order. If you are ready to stop bankrupting your future by funding your past and are prepared to become a conscious investor in your own abundance, please like this video as a pledge of your new financial and spiritual stewardship. You are now learning that your focus is the most powerful tool in the universe. You are learning to control the flow of your internal economy. But even with a cleared mind and a managed focus, there is a physical reality to navigate. What do you do when you are faced with a wall that seems impossible to climb? How do you move from the theory of faith into the action of miracles? In the next chapter, we shall unveil the three sacred movements. We will move from the inner work of thought to the outer work of manifestation. You will learn the exact physical and spiritual steps required to bridge the gap between your intent and your result. The staircase is being built beneath your feet. Are you ready to take the first step? In the theater of human existence, there is a frantic, recurring spectacle that defies all reason. It is the sight of the seeker, caught in the eye of a tempest, running in circles to fix the storm. The wind howls, the rain lashes, and the horizon is lost to the chaos of the moment. In this frantic state, the seeker believes that unless they are screaming into the gale, moving at a frenetic pace, and laboring with every ounce of physical strength to hold back the dark, they are failing. Their eyes are wild, their breath is shallow, and their hands are raw from grasping at the shifting air. They mistake their agitation for progress. Yet, consider the paradox of the eagle. When the storm reaches its fiercest intensity, the eagle does not fly lower to battle the wind, nor does it land to hide. It ascends. It locks its wings into the gale, and, through the grace of a singular, motionless posture, allows the storm itself to lift it above the clouds. This is the visual metaphor for the royal road. The majority of humanity remains at ground level, engaged in the beggar's battle with circumstance, convinced that they must outrun the storm through the sheer exertion of their own human will. They are exhausted, broken, and perpetually delayed. But the royal road is not a path of horizontal running, it is a path of vertical ascent. It requires the mastery of three sacred, often counterintuitive movements: the stillness of the sovereign, the testing of the expansiveness, and the follow-through of the faithful. These are not merely suggestions, they are the rhythmic mechanics of manifestation. To move from the struggle of the commoner to the success of the sovereign, one must first learn to be still, then to listen, and finally, to act with the certainty of one who already possesses the prize. To deconstruct the three sacred movements is to address the fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to create a life. Why does the human mind default to rushing? It is the ego's final, desperate attempt to remain relevant. Rushing is the signature of fear, the belief that the universe is slow, that the clock is ticking, and that if one does not act, the window of opportunity will slam shut. This is a recursive, self-fulfilling prophecy. When you rush, you act from a state of contraction. You make errors, you miss the subtle leads of intuition, and you create the very results that validate your fear, a life of lack and frustration. How then do the three movements break this cycle? The stillness of the sovereign. This is the foundational movement. To be still is not to be passive. It is to be authoritative. A sovereign does not rush, because a sovereign knows their power is not contingent on the clock. Stillness clears the mental static of the beggar's road. It is the act of saying, I do not know the how, but I know the source. By pausing, you signal to your subconscious that you are no longer operating from the state of the supplicant, but from the state of the owner. The testing of the expansiveness. This is the mechanism of intuition. The logical mind is tight. It is a closed system of past data. The royal road is expansive. It is an open system of future potential. When you are faced with a choice, you must perform a somatic check. Does the path make you feel smaller, tighter, and more anxious? That is the common road. Does it make you feel larger, more capable, and strangely peaceful, even if it is daring? That is the expansive signal. This movement teaches you to trust your own body as a barometer for the divine. The follow-through of the faithful. This is the final movement, the bridge between thought and reality. Faith without action is merely a fantasy. The follow-through is the willingness to act on a prompt, even when the logical mind is screaming, "This makes no sense." It is the movement from the interior landscape to the exterior. It is the leap off the ledge, trusting that the road will manifest beneath your feet as you descend. Why is this so difficult? Because we want the guarantee before the action. We want to see the harvest before we plant the seed. The royal road demands the inverse. You must act as if the harvest is already guaranteed, for your action is the very energy that commands the harvest to materialize. In a bustling city of the Victorian age, there lived a woman named Clara, who was a seamstress of modest means. She lived in a constant state of beggar's anxiety, terrified of the future, counting every penny, and feeling utterly defeated by the narrow confines of her life. She believed she was small, so she walked like someone who was small, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched, mind occupied by the tally of her debts. One afternoon, she felt a sudden, persistent, and entirely irrational nudge to go to the city's finest milliner and purchase an exquisite, expensive hat she could not afford, a hat that had no logical place in her budget. The logic of her mind revolted. "This is fiscal suicide," it screamed. "You are broke. You need bread, not silk." But the nudge persisted, and it was calm, steady, and expansive. It felt like an invitation to dignity. Clara took the step. She walked into the shop, bought the hat, and placed it upon her head. In that instant, her posture changed. She walked out of the shop no longer like a woman of lack, but like a woman of status. She walked with a new dignity, a new expectation, and a new energy. That evening, as she was walking home, she crossed paths with an old acquaintance, a woman who had been searching for exactly the talent Clara possessed to manage a high-end fashion house. She noticed Clara's poise, her look of refined success, and immediately approached her with an offer that would elevate her career forever. The hat was not just a hat, it was an act of faith. It was the follow-through that signaled to the universe that Clara was no longer a beggar. By assuming the state of the person who was already provided for, she created the alignment that allowed her supply to manifest. The miracle was not the hat. The miracle was the alignment that the hat facilitated. To embody these three movements today, you must engage in a practical test of your own faith. The practice. Stillness. The next time a crisis hits, stop. Physically sit down, close your eyes, do not solve. Breathe and decree. I do not know the how, but the divine within me knows. I wait for the lead. Stay until the frantic, urgent noise of your ego subsides. Expansiveness. Once calm, look at your current problems. Do not analyze them. Simply ask for a next step. Observe the thoughts that bubble up. Does an idea make your chest feel tight? Discard it. Does an idea feel expansive, even if it seems simple or illogical? That is your lead. Follow through. Take that step immediately. Do not wait for a lightning bolt or a guarantee. If the nudge is to make a call, call. If it is to go for a walk, go. By executing these movements, you are no longer a victim of your circumstances. You are the architect of your own alignment. You are moving from the spectator to the player. If you are ready to stop running in the storm and are prepared to ascend to the stillness of the sovereign, please like this video. You are anchoring your intention in the physical world. You are now learning to walk with the grace of the divine. You have the movements, and you have the mindset, but there is a final, formidable opponent that will rise to challenge your new sovereignty, your own logical mind. As you begin to see results, your ego will throw a tantrum. It will point at your bank account, your past failures, and the skepticism of others to convince you that you are being irresponsible. In the next chapter, we shall explore the tantrum of logic. We will learn why your discomfort is not a sign of failure, but the literal sensation of your old mental cage breaking apart. You are being born into a new reality. The struggle is simply the growing pains of your own divinity. Are you ready to face the tantrum and keep walking? In the dim, cavernous reaches of the subconscious mind, there exists a sanctuary that the ego has constructed over a lifetime, a cave of familiar shadows. It is a place where the boundaries are absolute, the dangers are known, and the lack of light is considered a comforting constant. For years, the inhabitant has navigated this darkness, bumping into the same walls, tripping over the same stones of habit, and calling this limited, claustrophobic sphere safety. Suddenly, a fissure appears in the stone ceiling above. A sliver of blinding, crystalline light pierces the gloom, illuminating the dust motes and the true, sorry state of the cavern. The inhabitant, having known only the darkness, does not rejoice. Instead, they shield their eyes, cry out in agony, and recoil. The light stings, it burns, it reveals that the safety they cherished was merely a confinement. This is the cinematic paradox of human transformation. The moment the soul begins to ascend toward the royal road, the logical mind, the ego, does not welcome the salvation. It interprets the light as an assault. It perceives the expansion as a threat to its sovereignty. It throws a tantrum. It screams that the darkness was better, that the walls were protective, and that the path toward the light is a path toward annihilation. The seeker, feeling this internal rebellion, often mistakes the sting of the light for the sting of danger, and in a moment of panic, they prepare to turn back. They do not realize that the pain is not the pain of a wound. It is the friction of a shell being shattered, the necessary discomfort of a consciousness that is finally outgrowing its cage. To understand why the mind rebels against its own liberation, we must apply a rigorous, recursive analysis to the nature of the ego. Why does the logical mind fight so fiercely to maintain a status quo that clearly causes suffering? The answer lies in the ego's fundamental obsession with predictability. The ego thrives on the past because the past is settled. It knows exactly how much pain to expect. exactly which fears will arise, and exactly how the story will end. Even a life of misery is, to the ego, superior to a life of unknown potential, because the misery is predictable. When one steps onto the royal road, one abandons the certainty of the known for the vastness of the unfolding. This terrifies the ego, which views the unknown as a vacuum of identity. It concludes that, if it is not the master of the narrative, if it cannot calculate the how and the when, it does not exist. How does the ego express this terror? It manifests as a tantrum. This tantrum takes the form of logical alarmism. It will point to your bank account and whisper, "You are being irresponsible." It will point to your past failures and hiss, "You are a fool. You will fall again." It will recruit the voices of skeptics in your life to validate its fear. It uses the language of reason to disguise the emotion of panic. The recursive trap is that the seeker often hears these alarms and believes they are coming from a place of wisdom. Surely, the seeker thinks, my logic is just trying to protect me. But we must ask, is it protecting you or is it confining you? When you feel that surge of irresponsibility or fear as you follow an intuitive nudge, you are actually feeling the resistance of the old blueprint being dismantled. The discomfort is not a warning sign to stop. It is the sensory feedback of your evolution. The ego fights because it knows that once you fully occupy the royal road, its reign as the primary authority of your life is over. The tantrum is simply the final noise of a dying system. In the great city of Aurelia, there was a renowned artisan who specialized in the crafting of intricate, mechanical locks so complex they were said to be impossible to open without the master's touch. A young apprentice, Thomas, had spent his entire youth in the master's workshop, learning the art of the cage. He knew every gear, every spring, and every bolt of the locks he built. His life was defined by the security of his trade. One day, an old traveler visited the shop. He did not ask to buy a lock. Instead, he showed Thomas a simple wooden key that held no mechanism, no gears, and no springs. This key, the traveler said, opens the door to the royal palace. But to use it, you must first dismantle every lock you have ever built. Thomas was horrified. Dismantle them? My locks are my life. They are my security, my identity, and my entire understanding of the world. To destroy them is to be left with nothing. The traveler smiled sadly. The locks were never designed to hold the world out, Thomas. They were designed to keep you in. The palace is waiting, but you cannot enter while you are clutching your tools of confinement. Thomas began the work. As he took his hammer to the first lock, his hands trembled. His mind, his inner logical voice raged against him. "You are destroying your livelihood," it screamed. "You are becoming a pauper. You have no future without these gears." Every swing of the hammer felt like an act of madness. The physical sensation of his panic was so intense that he almost threw his hammer aside to flee back to the safety of his workbench. But with every lock he broke, the workshop grew brighter. He realized that the locks weren't protecting him from thieves. They were blocking the sun. By the time he broke the final spring, his workshop, once a place of cramped, mechanical labor, had become a balcony opening onto the splendor of the palace. He had been so obsessed with the gearwork of his own anxiety that he had never seen the grandeur of the world that was waiting for him just beyond the door he had been keeping locked his entire life. To embody this truth today, you must prepare yourself for the tantrum. The next time you take a leap of faith, the next time you follow a nudge that logic deems risky or irrational, and the fear begins to rise, do not flee. Do not retreat into the cave of your old habits. The practice of the witness. When the alarm bells of your logic start to ring, sit quietly and observe them as if you were watching a tantrum in a public square. Do not engage. Do not argue. Do not try to reason with your anxiety. Simply say, "I acknowledge that you are afraid, but you are not the master here. You are the echo of an old way, and your noise is merely the sound of my transformation. Speak to your ego with the kindness and authority of a parent speaking to a frightened child. Thank it for its years of service in keeping you safe, but firmly state that the time for locks has passed. Every time you refuse to be intimidated by the ego's noise, you are re-anchoring yourself on the royal road. The sting of the light will fade, and the clarity of your true, unconfined life will take its place. If you are ready to stop fearing the tantrum of your own logic and are prepared to move past the threshold of your comfort zone, please like this video as a symbol of your courage to step into the light. You are now learning to witness your own transformation without being derailed by it. You have dismantled the locks, and you are beginning to see the vista of your true life. But there is one final, essential step to complete your journey. You have cleared the path, you have cleared the grudge, you have identified the source, and you have silenced the tantrum. Now, you must learn to live by the decree. In the final chapter, we shall explore the tapestry of divine order. You will learn that your words are not just sounds, they are the active threads of the master weaver. You will discover that you are the design itself, and that every decree you speak is weaving the fabric of your future. The road is open, and the loom is ready. Are you prepared to weave your masterpiece? In the grand, celestial workshop of existence, there hangs a tapestry so vast it spans the width of eternity. From the vantage point of the ordinary human experience, the dungeon of logic, this tapestry appears as a chaotic, distressing jumble. One sees only the reverse side, a landscape of tangled threads, hanging knots, frayed edges, and conflicting colors that seem to have no rhyme or reason. The individual, looking upon this messy backside of reality, suffers from the illusion of chaos. They see a blue thread cut short, a golden filament lost in a knot of gray, and they conclude that the weaver has failed, or that the design is being sabotaged by chance. The cinematic paradox, however, is revealed to the one who has walked the royal road. From the side of the master weaver, the vantage of the spirit, the design is breathtakingly coherent. The knots that seemed like failures from below are the precise anchors for the strength of the fabric. The threads that appeared to be severed were merely being repositioned for a more brilliant pattern. The apparent gaps are the negative space required for the beauty of the whole to emerge. The observer on the royal road realizes that they are not merely the string being pulled, they are the design being perfected. To see the front of the tapestry is to understand that the problems of the common road were never disruptions of the design, they were the very texture of its complexity. To master the art of living on the royal road, one must ascend to the role of the co-creator. The fundamental principle here is the power of the decree. Why does the spoken word hold such gravitational force? Because, in the architecture of the divine, thought is the blueprint, but the word is the construction. Why do we struggle to manifest our good? Because we use our words to describe our struggle rather than to define our future. We spend our lives narrating our poverty, detailing our grievances, and reciting our limitations as if they were immutable laws. We are, effectively, weaving our own cages. How, then, does the shift to the sovereign decree work? We must engage in the recursive discipline of self-correction. If the divine intelligence is the loom, then your word is the shuttle that carries the thread of creation across the warp of your experience. When you say, "I am struggling," you are literally weaving the thread of struggle into the fabric of your coming days. You are not reporting the truth, you are creating it. To live in divine order is to adopt the discipline of the decree. This is not a request, it is a command issued to the subconscious and the universe. It is the realization that your word has the power to bridge the gap between the tangled knots of the past and the perfected design of the future. When you speak, you must ask, is this word weaving the beauty I wish to see, or is it reinforcing the knot I wish to undo? the power of the royal road lies in the refusal to affirm the appearance of chaos. When you see the tangled threads of a problem, you do not cry out that the tapestry is ruined. You look at the threads and you decree. This too is part of the pattern, and it is moving toward a greater good. By shifting your word, you shift the loom. You stop being the victim of the design and become the deliberate artist of the work. In the annals of the ancient kingdoms, there was a legend of the royal heir who was sent to the provinces to learn the secret of the kingdom's prosperity. The heir arrived in a city gripped by a famine of spirit and supply. The inhabitants were miserable, constantly bewailing their fate, pointing to the empty fields, the dry wells, and the crumbling walls. They were caught in a collective trance of negation, their words creating a feedback loop of decay. The heir, observing this, did not join in their lament. Instead, every morning, he walked to the center of the town square, stood upon the highest stone, and issued a decree. He did not ask for food, he declared the abundance of the land. He did not speak of the drought. He spoke of the hidden currents of life that were even then preparing to rise. He did not mention the walls. He spoke of the city as a gateway of light. The citizens laughed. He is mad, they said. The fields are dust, yet he speaks of harvest. But the heir continued. He knew that the tapestry of the city was being woven by the words of its people. By refusing to agree with the appearance of lack, he began to change the frequency of the collective consciousness. Weeks passed. The people, moved by the heir's relentless, sovereign calm, began to stop their own lamentations. They began to speak of the harvest as if it were a certainty. They stopped describing the famine and began to decree the supply. And as their words changed, their actions changed. They stopped hoarding and started planting. They stopped arguing and started building. The harvest did not come as a magical lightning bolt. It came because the people had finally aligned their words with the divine order. The tapestry, once a gray mess of famine, was rewoven into a vibrant design of prosperity, one decree at a time. The heir had taught them that the city was not an object they possessed. It was a conversation they were having with the divine. To embody the mastery of the tapestry today, you must assume the role of the weaver. Your life is the fabric, and your words are the tools. Start each day, not by checking the knots of your circumstances, but by speaking the pattern you intend to manifest. Do not say, "I hope I can pay my bills." Decree, "The infinite supply of the universe is flowing through me. I am in my right place at the right time, and every need is met with perfect precision." Do not say, "I hope this relationship heals." Decree, "Divine harmony is restored. The perfect pattern of love is emerging in this connection. When you see not a challenge, a delay, a conflict, do not panic. Look at it, smile, and say, this is not the end of the design. This is a thread being positioned for a greater beauty." By doing this, you are no longer a spectator of your own life. You are the partner of the divine weaver. You are claiming your inheritance as an artist of reality. If you are ready to take your place at the loom and begin weaving the masterpiece of your own divine life, please like this video as a final commitment to your sovereignty. Subscribe to stay in alignment with the royal road, for the journey has only just begun. You have now walked the entirety of the royal road. You have left the bridge of struggle, mastered the two roads of the mind, cleared the courthouse of your heart, identified the true paymaster, and learned to weave your reality with the thread of the decree. You are no longer the person who began this journey. You are the architect, the navigator, the gardener, and the weaver. The tapestry of your life is unfolding in perfect, divine order. The only question that remains as you step into this new frequency is this: what masterpiece will you create when you realize that the loom is entirely in your hands? The threads are waiting. Begin your work.